According to the Brennan Center for Justice, in the past year, at least 19 states have passed laws that make it harder for Americans to vote. Wednesday night, Republicans voted to block a voting rights bill supported by Democrats. In Baltimore, President Biden took a question that got to the heart of what many Democrats and other Americans are wondering.
Now, many of us are disheartened as we watch a Congress fail to support police reform. We watch our voting rights vanish before our very eyes. Mr. President, my question is, what will you do over the next 3 years to rectify these atrocities, secure our democracy, and ensure that freedoms and liberties that all Americans should be entitled to?
My greatest regret is I had these three major pieces of legislation that are going to change the circumstances. But what it's done is prevented me from getting deeply up to my ears, which I'm going to do once this is done, in dealing with police brutality, dealing with the whole notion of what are we going to do about voting rights.
Ryan, I think about the time that I met you and our time in Ferguson together covering the story of policing. Voting also is such an up there topic for people, especially African Americans who were key to getting President Biden elected. I wonder what you make of that exchange. It was so powerful when watching it in real time. But also, what's at stake for President Biden when you think about what Democrats and other Americans are looking at? It's voting rights, it's policing reform. These are things that really get to the heart of how people live and survive in America.
Yeah, now that that's sort of fallen on the legislative branch side, this is really going to fall ultimately to the executive branch. You know, on the voting side, the Justice Department has actually doubled the number of lawyers they have working in their voting section of the Civil Rights Division and are trying to expand there. But because of that 2013 Supreme Court decision that it struck down a major provision of the Voting Rights Act, that's been really difficult for them to actually stop any of these laws from going into effect before they actually are going to effect. And what happens is you have to file these lawsuits, and that litigation takes a very long amount of time. So ultimately, a lot of these laws are going to go into effect that are restricting voting. I think on the police reform side, that's another thing, that there's limited resources in the executive branch. The Justice Department can only investigate through pattern and practice investigations, such as we saw in Ferguson, a limited number of actual entities. And in order to really bring about broader reform, you're going to need to take these sort of bigger swings and try to get ways of, enacting police reform that isn't just individually fixing this police department and this police department and this police department. You need something more systematic. You need a more universal approach. And that's something that there's only so much the executive branch can do with the laws on the books today.
And Jake, you're nodding your head. A key part of this, of course, is the issue of the filibuster. Last night, in what is this really newsy town hall, President Biden said he might be open to having a loophole in the filibuster related to voting rights and many, he said, other issues. What do you make of that? What's your reporting tell you about how likely that is to actually happen?
Seungmin and I could give this answer together in unison.
Trust me, you're both. This question could have gone both.
There are not 50 votes to do that. I mean, Joe Manchin has gotten to telling us to just stop asking him about the filibuster. He says, I'm not going to engage on this topic. He's pro-filibuster. That's very difficult for Democrats to internalize and hear, but he is for the 60-vote threshold. So Joe Biden could say he's not for it, but he doesn't have a vote in the Senate anymore. So he needs to get Joe Manchin on board. And I find it very difficult to believe, to be honest with you, that after this bruising legislative fight, with Manchin and Sinema voting for a product that they're going to like, but it's going to be a stretch for them, that they're then going to turn around and blow up the filibuster. I just don't see it.
And Seungmin, you could have given that answer with Jake. I just want to ask you really quickly, what's at stake here, though, the legacy of President Biden, when you think about what happens if he doesn't get some of these big bills through, of voting rights, and the issue of democracy somehow doesn't get resolved under his watch?
Right. I mean, President Biden came in very ambitiously promising a lot of things, but clearly voting rights has been a central issue for Democratic lawmakers, for civil rights activists, for so many voters in these key states such as Georgia that propelled him to victory. I mean, this is something that voters definitely feel in those key states that President Biden owes them. But because of this legislative rule that President Biden has no control over, he himself has very little control over this debate. Now, what President Biden can do is really use that bully pulpit to make the public case for getting rid of this rule that he has said is a relic of the Jim Crow era. And I think Jen Psaki previewed that earlier today when she said, you will hear more from the president in the coming weeks about what he means by that and what he he's going, sort of more laying out his thinking on the filibuster. But Biden, it's not really his style to bully, hard-headed senators into supporting what he wants.
And I should tell you, I hear that from the White House when they say he remembers what it was like to be a senator and not be bullied.